This is an extract from the Leader Coronavirus Daily podcast by the Evening Standard and hosted by me, David Marsland. To hear the whole thing, search for it on your podcast provider. There were more trains running, but there were definitely fewer passengers getting on or off at Waterloo Station. People are supposedly going back to the office, but they're apparently not using traditional routes.
The trains are relatively quiet, really, at the moment.
It wasn't that packed on the tube, but they were sitting like at least 2 seats apart.
I'm noticing my trains are a bit busier. I mean, I say busy. 10 people, a carriage isn't that busy, but still a bit busier.
So how are people getting to work? Evening Standard features writer Sam Fishwick joins me over Zoom. Sam, are people finding different ways of getting into the office?
I mean, the numbers last week suggested that since Monday, when obviously the Prime Minister invited anyone who couldn't work from home to return to work, they've had an uptick of about 10% on the TfL network. Now, they're obviously hoping that the TfL network remains largely empty. They can take, TfL have set a capacity of 13 to 15% of peak capacity on the tube. So from people I've spoken to, they're hoping for a 20 to 30% uptake on single person vehicles. So scooters, bicycles, whether that's your own bicycle or scooter or one you've hired.
People are going to have to take a financial hit though. I mean, bikes aren't cheap, are they?
Yeah, bikes aren't cheap. I mean, the Cycle to Work scheme, which is the scheme by which most people who work get some financial support towards a bicycle, they've seen a 200% increase in people signing up. And I know from speaking to a few stockists that they're just struggling to they don't have the bikes, frankly. They're not used to this kind of demand. And yeah, bikes aren't cheap. Scooters aren't cheap. People get tired, David. You've got Londoners who do work more than one job and even who work a single job, and they just want to slump on the tube and be rolled home.
And then you've got that issue that the thing that would put a lot of people off doing things like getting a bike or taking a scooter to work is that there's a perception that it's really dangerous. But is London itself changing? There's lots of kind of cones out there on the streets if you go out, and it looks like there are more things like cycle lanes going in.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It is changing. It's quite exciting. London is quite ahead of other sort of cities of a similar stature around the world for this. We've got a fairly progressive scheme. I mean, it's worth saying that in Paris, where the number of people who rely on public transport is similar, the Mayor Anne Hidalgo has talked about tactical urbanism. But London is practicing its own form of tactical urbanism, turning streets into cycle-only streets in central London and asking local councils to do the same. You're seeing more cycle lanes popping up almost overnight. Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, has allocated £250 million to UK-wide programme of sort of cycle lanes, and also significantly expanding pavements. You're seeing pavements being doubled in size rapidly, because I think half of journeys in London are under 3 miles. The hope is that people will want to just walk to work.
Yeah, I mean, can a fat bloke like me, who is incredibly handsome in a Danny DeVito style of way, realistically get on a bike and get to work?
Well, David, you're clearly a very svelte figure, but I did take the point that interestingly, studies have shown that people are far more likely to walk than they are to cycle. In studies that previously been done, there's been no extra take-up when governments have encouraged cycling and walking in cycling, but the number of walkers has doubled. I think it serves a double purpose, and if we are going to take weight as an issue, studies from the University of Glasgow have shown that obesity in Britain is an enormous risk factor for more severe cases of COVID-19 related illnesses in hospitals, and this idea that we need to get virus fit is going to be quite a sort of crucial plank of public health planning in the years to come anyway.
And I wonder if in London, even before all this began, I wonder if people will be looking at different, more creative ways of getting to work. Because here in this city, I've seen people riding pianos to work. There was once a rubber duck going up the Thames. There's all kinds of ways of getting to work. Do you think we're going to see some slightly unusual commutes coming up?
I've always loved the people who commute to work via canoe down the Thames and down the canals. There's a lady who I've seen every day since the start of lockdown skateboarding around Peckham, and I actually spoke to her the other day. She started rolling around with a broom. She said she didn't like the gym. Skateboarding is her new form of lockdown exercise, and the broom is so that she can sweep any pebbles that she comes across out of her way. Should we encourage the return of the horse-drawn carriage? It might be romantic. It might make a nice change in pace. I think the thing that's worth saying, David, though, is that you're going to see a lot less people commuting Habits have changed. The office is changing, and the 9 to 5 is changing. Lots of people hated commuting anyway. There have been so many studies done on the stress commuting has on professionals, the unhappiness it causes. There's one study from a university in Sweden that suggested that for couples who have to commute more than 40 minutes every day, they're 40% more likely to divorce. So I think, if people can find different forms of commuting, particularly if they're open air, it does make for a sort of happier populace. The other thing I'll say is that it's imperative to, in much the same way that we flattened the curve for the NHS, to flatten the peak of commuting for the TfL, the rush hour at the start of the day, the rush hour at the end of the day. That is what our commuter networks are really, really worried about. That's where physical distancing is no longer possible, and therefore transport is no longer safe. So I think you'll see a lot of business groups, hopefully in consultation with each other, saying to each other that, look, we've got to stagger the times that we're starting work. We've got to stagger the times that we're asking our employees to come in, and we've got to stagger the times that we're asking them to leave work at the end of the day.
Search for the Leader Coronavirus Daily on any podcast provider to hear more from the podcast.